Alarm on the GOP front. Some of America's biggest Republican donors will gather in Virginia Beach next month for a meeting to rally behind Governor Glenn Youngkin. The gathering, called the Red Vest Retreat, will begin on October 17th and be focused on the Republican effort to win full control of the General Assembly in Virginia's upcoming elections. But according to a Washington Post reporter, this will also be an opportunity to try to shove Youngkin into the Republican presidential race. Thomas Turfy, a Republican donor, said Youngkin appears to be leaving the door open. And if Republicans win in Virginia, maybe we can talk him into it. The money would be there. Former Attorney General under Donald Trump, William Barr, reportedly told the Washington Post, "I'd welcome Youngkin putting his oar in."
Even though nearly 1 in 3 potential Republican primary voters watched the debate Wednesday, the performance of the candidates had little impact on the overall race. According to a 538 Washington Post Ipsos poll taken after the debate, 33% say Florida Governor Ron DeSantis had the best performance, while 18% say the same for former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley and 15% for entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy. But most of those who say DeSantis performed best already had a favorable opinion of him, according to the Washington Post survey taken before the debate. The Republicans considering DeSantis and Haley did increase 4 points among those considering voting in the primaries, from 59 to 63% for DeSantis and from 43 to 47% for Haley after the debate. But all of the other candidates saw even smaller shifts than just those 4 points.
Although the share of Republicans saying candidates performed excellent or very good decreased for most candidates from the first debate. A recent Economist YouGov poll found among 513 registered voters saw Trump with the lead at 53% and DeSantis second in line at just 14. Brutal. So this is obviously why some of the big Republican donors, Jess, are considering bringing in Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. They want someone who can conceivably challenge Trump. I think it's a horrible idea. I actually love Governor Glenn Youngkin. I live in Virginia. I voted for him, full disclosure. I would be very sad for him to leave Virginia, and I would be especially sad for him to go on the campaign trail only to get decimated by Trump, lose the Trump base, and basically destroy all of the credibility that he's built up with Republican voters. I mean, this would basically just look like the Republican establishment and the mega donors who have always despised Trump because he went against the old guard way of thinking in the Republican Party on issues like war and economic spending and tariffs. And it would be a concerted effort to take that guy out using Youngkin as their sort of willful pawn. And I think Youngkin is better than that. He should hold off, wait until Trump is done running, and whether or not he becomes president, maybe he can run the next time around. But to do it now as a very concerted anti-Trump effort, I think is just a death wish.
I think it's extraordinarily interesting that at a time when we have the GOP conducting an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden for the business dealings with Burisma based in Ukraine, that you have this mega donor, Thomas Petterfy, trying to prop up this candidate Youngkin, who seemingly does not plan to enter the race, and the mega donors seem to think they can convince him to enter the race. You had Ron DeSantis receive $570,000 from Thomas Petterfy, who, by the way, is a citizen of Ukraine, who is very friendly with Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban instituted a policy where you cannot talk about sexual orientation in schools from kindergarten through the 3rd grade. Then shortly after this donation from Thomas Petterfy, you have Ron DeSantis pushing this similar policy known as the Don't Say Gay bill. The influence that this person, Thomas Petterfy, who is a citizen of Hungary, has over United States election, I think is outsized. When we consider the amount of influence that mega donors have over politics, we would be probably not so surprised to find that Thomas Petterfy was the reason CPAC was held in Hungary. And so when you think about the Republican Party being so critical of foreign influence in American politics and American government, you'd think they would be critical of their mega donor, not even being a citizen of the United States, being particularly fond of the anti-socialist policies of the far-right government in Hungary. Now he wants to prop up a hand-picked candidate, Youngkin, to enter the race when we already have Republicans running in the race that are establishment candidates. And so it's very shocking to me that American politics is going in the direction of whoever the rich guys have influence over, not even necessarily the establishment, are those who are favored to win. I don't think, a candidate like Youngkin, if he was propped up, would beat Donald Trump, but could possibly be the front runner among the current Republicans that we have.
Yeah, I think it's a shame that that level of influence and money being being given to these politicians has kind of tainted the grassroots cultural movement in the GOP. What you're talking about in terms of the parental rights and education bill and Governor Youngkin's policies on transgender students were really born out of grassroots organizing among parents who were attending school board meetings, who found out during the pandemic some of the things that their kids were learning in school. And that was a legitimate, I think, new focus from Republican voters. And to have that injection of cash suggest that it wasn't, I think is damaging to that larger cultural debate. When we go back to when Youngkin first jumped into the governor race, even during the primary, it was his idea actually to reach out to some of those parents who were protesting at the school board meetings and talk to them directly and hear about their concerns before it was ever really a campaign strategy. Actually, it was before he even announced his campaign that he was talking to those individuals. And again, I think Youngkin has a lot of credibility. I think he's done a really good job as governor. He has a very high approval rating in a state that is trending blue, basically is solid blue at this point. And he stands a chance to have a Republican trifecta this fall in the state House of Delegates and the state Senate alongside the governorship. To go and try to battle against Trump now seems pretty boneheaded. I think he should continue what he's doing, which is focusing on these statewide races. He's been really heavily involved. I just went down to Virginia Beach recently for a piece of reporting I did called the Youngkin Blueprint. And throughout that reporting, I was able to talk to the governor himself. He was asked by several people at a Parents Matter event in Virginia Beach to run for president. And his response was basically, I'm too busy. And he is busy. He has his hand directly in a lot of these races, especially the swing races in places like Virginia Beach and Norfolk. And he's trying to fashion together a more effective way for the Republican Party to run races. And it's not just built off of his popularity, but also recent redistricting in the state, selecting good candidates that actually speak to the concerns of voters rather than trying to nationalize every single campaign. He's bringing in a ton of fundraising money, and he's launching the Secure Your Vote initiative, which is encouraging Republicans to bank their votes early and participate in mail-in voting and early voting so that Republican campaigns can then view that incoming data and tailor their strategies toward that. It's what the Democrat Party has been trying to do for the past decade or so. It's kind of stunning that the Republican Party hasn't made a concerted effort to do that until just recently. And so he clearly has a good strategy. He has a good plan. But let's get it done in Virginia first, see how it goes, and finish out your time as governor before trying to take on who has so obviously been ordained the party's leader at this point with a 50 percentage point lead against all of the other candidates.
I think I would push back on the fact that a lot of the organizing around the Don't Say Gay bill and a lot of these bills came from a lot of organizing with Moms for Liberty, which is a 501c4 organization, meaning they don't need to disclose their donors. There's been a lot of questions around how this organizing is funded, but it's certainly not grassroots. They claim to have a budget of around $300,000 a year, but we also know that they get a lot of money from Republican super PACs as well. So when we think about how well funded this organizing is, the last thing I would call it is grassroots. You have these very well-trained organizers backed by a ton of money. They are paid to do this work. They come in and they talk with parents and members of the school board about these issues that were not issues before they came in. And so I think when we think about the money and the influence on politics, when we call something grassroots, it can't be something that's a top-down approach coming from an organization with a ton of money. When I think of grassroots, I think of people volunteering their free time because they care so much about an issue. I wouldn't categorize the Moms for Liberty and the push for these Don't Say Gay bills, not having teaching about gender orientation or sexual orientation and having books banned at schools. I wouldn't call that grassroots. That's from the same infrastructure that's funding a lot of these campaigns and influencing the policy platforms of a lot of our politicians.
The infrastructure actually came after the grassroots movement, though. Moms for Liberty wasn't actually founded until January of 2021, and the school board movement in Virginia started well before that, actually pretty shortly after the pandemic launched in the summer of 2020. And it really was built out of parents going to school board meetings because they were upset that their children's schools were closed and that in order to go back to school, they might be subject to mask and vaccine mandates. It was born out of that those parents then started looking into the curriculum as they saw what their kids were learning on Zoom meetings. And that was when CRT and radical gender ideology became a part of the conversation. Groups like Moms for Liberty, groups like the parental rights groups in Virginia, which include one found by Ann Pryor, all came after that. So there was a grassroots movement initially, and just like any grassroots movement, has now been supported by infrastructure that was grown out of that. A perfect example of this was when Stacey Langton, who was a mom at a Fairfax County public school board meeting, showed up. She had no connection to any of these political operations. She had found out that her school library, her kids' school library, had explicit content in many of the books there. And she tried to read them aloud at a school board meeting and was actually censored because she was told it wasn't appropriate for television and wasn't appropriate for the school board meeting feed because children might be watching, which was incredibly ironic considering children could have gone and picked up that book in a school library. So I don't think your characterization of the parental rights movement, particularly in Virginia, is accurate.
It sounds like the issue of parental rights as it, regards this topic of sexual orientation, of gender orientation, of LGBTQ plus issues, that became more of the central focus of this group after this injection of funding came in. Similarly, Ron DeSantis making the Don't Say Gay bill central in his focus came shortly after this funding came in from Thomas Petterfy. And it mirrors this exact policy that Viktor Orban enacted in Hungary. So when we think about the foreign influence on our country, on our elections, on policy making in the United States, is this focus on transgender issues, on sexual orientation and sexual content, on gender identity, is it coming from actual working American people that see it as an issue? Or is this something to obfuscate the focus on our failing economy, on the fact that most working people are living paycheck to paycheck? That is why most of these Republican candidates are not garnering support, because that's not central in their campaign. And that is also why Youngkin would fail, because when you have billionaires who have an agenda not to restructure our economy so that it works for everyday working people, that's when you have the kind of political candidates that don't garner the support necessary to win elections. And I think we saw Donald Trump lose the popular vote because of that exact reason, because they saw him run as a populist and then govern as an elitist and cut taxes for the very wealthy and not do much to bolster up the working class that desperately needs an increase in wages, which have been stagnant since the 70s. So I don't think Youngkin's going to be their guy. I don't think these existing candidates are going to be their guy. They need a plan to improve the economy and the conditions for working people and stop being distracted from these issues, which we can trace back to foreign influence in American politics.
I think people are capable of taking on economic and cultural issues at the same time. I think American voters are incredibly intelligent. I would also point out that the Tax Cut and Jobs Act did have a historic tax cut for the middle and working class as well, although that did expire, and the people who voted for that bill should have made sure that that cut was a permanent part of the legislation. We're going to have to leave it there. We'll be back with more Rising after this.